troops. A base spokeswoman says about 10 airmen from the 88th Air Base Wing have already been deployed to the region. The USS Nassau is one of 3 amphibious-ready ships serving in the Kosovo conflict. Newly arrived in the Adriatic, it's on hand to provide a military boost. CNN's Rusty Dornan reports it's well equipped to aid with the refugee crisis as well.
The arrival of the USS Nassau, an amphibious assault ship in the Adriatic this week, means additional firepower in terms of airstrikes. But the ship could help with a major humanitarian effort as well. The Nassau has 4 operating rooms, 7 doctors, and 300 hospital beds. If needed, large numbers of refugees could be treated and transported.
Our medical capability and the number of people we can take on board for a short period of time, we can have a real impact. 1,700
Marines are on board the Nassau. While many were trained as a landing force for amphibious assaults, their other mission could be disaster relief.
It's an old mission for Marines. We're prepared to go in, distribute food, assist in the movement of personnel. We have a helicopter squadron embarked aboard this ship, has the capability to carry not only a lot of humanitarian assistance, but also to move a lot of people around should that need arise.
The Nassau has 24 helicopters. The ship could be used as a transfer point.
We could move people around within the ship to create some berthing spaces to make them available, but probably 400 or 500 people overnight without too much trouble. And we could probably process through 2,000 people a day if we could move them on to another location.
For now, the Nassau with its 6 Harriers is a launching point for the war. It could be called upon to treat the human consequences of that conflict. Rusty Dornan, CNN, aboard the USS Nassau.
In Macedonia, I think what you're seeing here is those reconnaissance scimitar light armored vehicles loading up onto one of the new Ro-Ro ships procured for precisely this purpose of moving British forces rapidly around the world.
Airfield. A little bit special today, I'm able to show you or let you listen to the crew audio, which should give you a good impression of both the workload and the tension in the cockpit during the final stages of the attack. You can see clearly on the top of the picture there the airfield, and the target this crew is going for is the hangar in the center of the picture. Can we have the audio, please? Tension's pretty great by now. You'll see they're attacking one of 2 hangars there, and the other hangar is also attacked by this aircraft's wingman. Moving on now to the second attack. This is against the same airfield, and in the top left-hand corner you can just see the smoke from the previous 2 attacks. This crew is going against a headquarters building. That's the target he selected, and he's locked his equipment on it now. Paveway 2 1,000-pound bombs being dropped against this target, 2 against each of them. The next 4 attacks are all Harrier attacks, and all using BL-755. As you know, the Harriers are launched against close air support targets, mobile and tactical targets, and if they're unable to be directed onto those, they're then cleared to release their weapons on targets such as these, their secondary targets, and this is a storage site for munitions and equipment. The Harrier pilot's using 4 BL-755s against this target, and you can see the impacts there. The next view is something I've not shown you before because we have limitations on how much of this information we can record. This is from the Harrier's TV tracker. This is a TV system, not a tile system. This is used for weapon aiming. Again, he's dropping BL-755s here. Unfortunately, the aircraft pulls off the target and you can't see the impact, but this just gives you a good indication of the damage to the target already. You can see there's two buildings there which are close to the center of the picture, are already severely damaged. And that's the sort of film we use for battle damage assessment against these targets. Next film again is Harrier film, again with BL-755, the cluster weapon. And this is against a series of revetments along a road in Kosovo. These revetments would be used to store equipment, fuel bowsers, ammunition, and the like. And what you're actually seeing now is a tiled picture, and this is from an aircraft, a further aircraft, which is standing off and taking these reconnaissance photographs. The pilots actually doing the attacking will be using the TV tracker system you've just seen. The picture rotates as the pod swivels underneath the aeroplane to keep locked onto the target area. And you see the first BL-755 attack go in, hitting the revetments and destroying the contents. Again using BL-755. Thank you.
Miles, what's happening here at the moment is it's busy. The relief effort is continuing. But you're right, the big news is the deployment of the 24 Apache attack helicopters. We've just received word from the Pentagon that is going to happen. Now we'll just pan over and show you where we expect the Apaches to land. We expect the Apaches to land here. The Apache is a very heavy helicopter, lots of armor. So a special airfield is being prepared for them. They're expected here shortly. Now the mission of these attack helicopters, according to NATO Supreme Allied Commander Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, is to take out Serbian armor, Serbian artillery and tanks. Now the Apache, well equipped to do that. It can carry missiles, it can carry rockets, it even has a 30-millimeter cannon. When the Apaches do get here, they'll have a huge support team. They'll have some 2,500 troops, 14 Bradley fighting vehicles. They'll have other support helicopters. I'm told they're going to be Black Hawks. Miles?
Overhead shots from the cameras in aircraft makes it seem a long way away, but if we were to look at a video of tests of the BL-755, it gives perhaps a better impression of exactly how these weapons work, and then what it would be like if you're on the ground. The bomb splits up and 147 bomblets come out, spreading out into an oval. This is up in, I believe, Scotland, and you get a very large oval spread of munitions all over the area. This is another test run against tank targets, and that's a bit closer than we're seeing from the aircraft observing, but it's...
Well, it's devastating if you're a soldier on the ground and
yes,
you're in the middle of that.
You would not want to be under that at all. But they have a great advantage against armoured formations or groups of vehicles is you can cover a wide area. However, if you do have a lot of refugees and military units mixed up, you're going to have a lot of problems and you could end up with some serious casualties.
Indeed, I mean, the suggestion on that is that they're using refugees in some of these convoys as human shields.
We have also...
Missiles hit an oil refinery in Novi Sad. The Yugoslavian state news agency Tanjug said several bombs struck the Belgrade industrial area of Pančevo, where targets included a nitrogen fertilizer plant. And Serb authorities gave unconfirmed reports that a school in another Belgrade suburb was bombed, killing one child and injuring several other people.
Forces. One Serbian commander virtually challenged NATO to mount a land invasion, saying there were 150,000 men under arms in Kosovo ready for war. Whether a deployment of ground troops hangs on the agreement of President Milosevic or simply the sufficient destruction of his forces is now the issue.
The infrared images of two soldiers stand out clear as day, only it isn't day. This is the latest Army night vision technology. The Army says it's a quantum improvement over the first-generation devices deployed during the Gulf War.
It means that we can recognize and identify targets at greater range, or recognize and identify friends at much greater range.
We can recognize an ID at ranges further out than the first-gen systems. So even if these scout forces were detected by the enemy, they would still be outside of gun range.
Two key technologies on display: image intensifiers, also known as night vision goggles and gun sights, and FLIR, forward-looking infrared. Image intensifiers give you this green screen look you've seen so much of during the war coverage. I-squared, as it's called, uses starlight and ambient light, greatly magnified. With FLIR, forward-looking infrared, heat is what counts. The hot spots show white.
The purpose is to allow our soldiers to find targets, identify them as friend or foe, and then fire if necessary.
This will give us more capability to, for example, avoid the fratricide that we had in the Gulf.
Fratricide, the killing of one's own. Soldiers, as in the Gulf War, where 24% of the 148 U.S. combat casualties were blamed on friendly fire. Or, in the tragic example of April 14th, civilians bombed by mistake by a NATO pilot who says he thought he was striking a military convoy. The Army believes better night vision will help.
Absolutely essential to have capability for them to see longer ranges than they can actually fire their weapons, so that they then are in basically a commanding position.
But at $1 billion plus, the Army's night vision wish list is a real eye-opener of a spending proposal. Rick Lockridge, CNN, Fort Abbey Hill, Virginia.
On the Crusher. The base has been in operation since World War II, but is currently being used by US and NATO planes for missions over Yugoslavia. At first sight, it might look like just another British airbase. But on closer inspection, RAF Fairford is a little slice of America in the heart of the English countryside. US pilots and their support staff are treated to as many of their home comforts as possible, from the food they eat, paid for in US dollars, to the familiar-sounding street names where they return to their barracks. From Fairford, US Air Force bombers are primed and made ready to launch airstrikes against Yugoslavia under the auspices of NATO. Since the campaign began, staffing at the base has increased from 200 to 800 personnel. There's capacity for another 600 if needed. Right now, the base is hosting the 2nd Air Expeditionary Group, which is made up of both B-1 and B-52 aircraft. The force is on constant standby for sorties over Yugoslavia after going into action for the first time on March 24th. Although the B-52s are now almost 40 years old, they're still an integral part of the force and have been involved since the first wave of attacks. Well, I'm joined now by the commander of the 2nd Air Expeditionary Group here at Fairford. When did you come over here to start beginning planning this operation?
Initial operation started here, we got here February 20th, about 50 days ago. We've been here for a while.
But at that point, you didn't know whether or not these NATO strikes were going to go ahead?
Certainly we didn't, but we were ready within about 24 hours to start operations if we need be. But, of course, we were delayed for a while and didn't start flying until about 30 days later.
So how many people came over with you, and whereabouts have they all come from?
Initially, we started with about 300 people and 8 B-52s. We've since then added B-1s and about another 300 people. So we're up to about 600 people, and people from all over the world. And that's the nice part. We've got a complete team here from Air Force bases all around the world. 8 different major commands, and come together to make a great team.
And how do you coordinate them within a matter of hours to get up and running?
Let's say it's a tough part to get everybody here and bedded down and sleeping and eating, and the communications is a big part. We have to set up communications with our headquarters and be ready to fly.
In how short a time?
About 24 hours. Like I said, we were ready to start operations at that time. Luckily, we were able to have a little bit of time to get set up and actually do some training flights while we were here before starting flying operations, before we started flying combat.
The terrain over which some of these pilots are flying is very different to what they might expect perhaps in the desert in the United States. So how did they cope with that? Hasn't weather been quite a big problem for them?
It's certainly different conditions than we flew in Desert Storm and out in Southwest Asia that we're used used to. But we train in all weather and all conditions, and that's a great part about airplane or bombers, is that we fly in all types of weather, and we have great capability with the standoff of the B-52 and then the speed and the stealth of the B-1 and B-2 are able to go in country and fly over targets.
I assume, do you know in advance when or where the planes will be going?
We start planning about 24 hours in advance and start planning for the next day's missions. So we plan all through the night and then get the airplanes ready the next day and fly missions and then continue that cycle through the next day and start loading airplanes again.
And so overall, what is the biggest challenge for you?
Just the getting everybody here and working in the same direction, 600 people and all headed one direction from different places. It's been a bit of a challenge, but it's a great Air Force folks coming together and making a team to support the NATO alliance.
Commander, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sitting in the cockpit of a B-52 bomber here at the RAF base at Fairford in Gloucestershire. This base is only one of many bases which are being used to launch NATO airstrikes against Yugoslavia. The main NATO airbase is at Aviano in Italy. There's also the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a carrier in the Adriatic Sea. CNN's Rusty Dornan has been reporting from there and gives us this look at how pilots there are coping with poor weather.
Scott, a Navy FA-18 pilot, has been flying sorties off the USS Theodore Roosevelt for the last week. The Navy only wants his first name used for safety concerns. For Scott, the most frustrating part of this mission has been, in a word, weather. Bad visibility means often landing with the same bombs he took off with.
You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're dropping bombs on something that you don't know what you're dropping on. That's been one of the key elements to this whole campaign so far, is making sure that the collateral damage is kept down to a minimum.
Your lens said Tomcat 540 clear deck.
Commander Tom Sparks is the Theodore Roosevelt's air boss.
You have 3 of them coming back, 702, 700, 706.
Whether it's a launch or a landing, it's his responsibility. On the deck of a carrier, planes make what's known as a controlled crash landing. When aircraft return with unfired weapons due to weather, the weapons may be de-armed, but it's still thousands of pounds of metal that could go crashing across the deck.
When the aircraft come back with ordnance, we're concerned about the ordnance coming off the aircraft. That's a concern. It could happen, but it's very rare that that does happen.
The carrier was scheduled to go to the Gulf, but was diverted to the Adriatic a little more than a week ago. The pilots thought they'd be flying over flat desert terrain. Navy pilots train in the mountainous regions of Nevada, similar to those in Yugoslavia. But switching missions so quickly definitely changes things a bit.
It really takes a little bit of extra concentration, and in the brief you have to go over in detail the different target altitudes and elevations, the way the aircraft's going to perform.
Perform is what pilots here would like to do a little more.
It does get frustrating when you come back and you didn't get to do what you set out to do.
Rusty Dornan, CNN, aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt.
That ground to have the helicopters sit on so they wouldn't sink in the mud. Today, it is thunderstorms, hail, lightning, really bad weather in that area. And since these helicopters will have to fly a considerable distance over water to get there, it just is not safe. And the sources tell me that they were not going to make that run today. It's dark over there now, and they certainly won't make it tonight. So the earliest they could get in there is sometime tomorrow. Now, sources also say when they get there, it probably will not be long before they are deployed. It is a specialty mission. What they will be doing is going after specific targets, long-range targets, over in Kosovo. Now, we have some animation, if we can show you that, exactly how that mission would work. That's an MLRS, multiple launch rocket system. It fires a missile that goes out and would quell or put down the ground defenses. These are multiple rockets that it hits down on the ground. The Apache would then fly out in its mission, suppressing ground fire along the way, and then it would take out its target. A Hellfire missile fired at a tank, exactly the role that this was designed for. And as it comes back...
Well, this is certainly the most devastating piece of ground equipment. There are tanks, there are British, German and French tanks in Macedonia, but in Albania, this is a very smart piece of equipment. It has a range, depending on the type of warhead and weapon it's used, of about 200 kilometers. Of course, they won't always be stuck in the ditch just outside the airport. That gives you an indication of the problems there are, however, in getting heavy equipment across the mountains into Kosovo. If this is